You're listening to a Stanislaus Tutoring and Mentoring Program production. The following interview is one in a series of mentoring lectures conducted by the organization's Executive Director, Michael Camara. Future interviewees will include university professors, prominent local business owners and working professionals, and local public servants both currently holding office and candidates running for office. If you'd like to nominate someone you know to be interviewed, please send an email to info@stamptutors.com.
Our guest today is Mr. Daniel Deisenroth, Assistant Professor of Economics at California State University Stanislaus. He teaches a variety of courses, including principles of both micro and macroeconomics, intermediate microeconomic theory, agricultural economics and policy, and resource and environmental economics. I've crafted tonight's questions based on an amalgam of concerns expressed by CSU Stanislaus students, Modesto Junior College students, and a select number of high school seniors in the Hilmar and Turlock area. My objective is to address a variety of issues that are directly relevant to the local educational community and are often considered provocative or controversial. Whether it's the employment prospects of young adults aged 18 to 24 in Stanislaus and Merced counties, or something more expansive like California tax policy and educational funding issues, the STAMP lecture series was developed as a useful and applicable information exchange outside of a more traditional classroom setting. I hope listeners find value in this casual radio discussion format and are able to use the provided information for their own personal benefit and to the benefit of their family and friends. In short, no one will be tested or quizzed on the following information. Welcome to the studio, Professor Deisenroth. And could you begin by speaking about your own educational path, past and present?
Yeah, I grew up in California in the South San Francisco Bay Area, and I went to UC Davis right after I graduated from high school. I studied biology there. And of course, I was very interested in biology and ecology in general, but I didn't see a lot happening in terms of the job market for people with ecology degrees, and a lot of that may have been because I wasn't the most A-plus student. But I did take an interest in economics towards the end of my undergraduate program. Studied economics at Colorado State University. I earned my master's degree, and I became very passionate about the topic there. And then I earned my PhD, and then I became an assistant professor here at Cal State Stanislaus.
One thing that I like to ask young people is their senior year of high school, it's mandated that they take that econ government hybrid class one semester each. Yeah. You ended up pursuing a degree in economics. What did you think of economics when you were a 17, 18-year-old high school student?
I did take this economics class in high school and I think a civics class. Honestly, at the time, I wasn't very interested. And we were talking about the stock market. Pretty much we talked about the stock market. That was all we ever talked about. And, at the time, I wasn't interested in the stock market, and that was the end of it. In reality, economics is a study of how people behave given the constrained resources that they have. Basically, how do people manage their scarce resources? And that is not the study of the stock market, and that's not the study of money. You can look at the economics of jobs. You can look at the economics of energy, the economics of natural resources. You can look at the economics of healthcare, economics of anything. It's really everywhere. I've taken an interest in natural resource economics just because I've always been passionate about the outdoors and the environment. But it's such a versatile toolbox, a versatile way to think about things. That wasn't really presented to me in high school.
So you were able to mix that original interest of ecology into your economics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to answer your original question, how did I feel about things in high school? When I was a senior in high school, I just wanted to be done with high school. I wasn't really interested in school too much at all.
Yeah, it seems to be the norm, I would think.
I guess. I don't know. I could point fingers at teachers or whatever, but I think I was just not really putting my all into it. I was focused more on girlfriends and that kind of stuff.
Automobiles and the opposite sex are
That's right.
of far more importance at that age to the young man. So we'll begin. Our first question of the evening. We continually see articles printed in major dailies reporting on the unemployment challenges facing recent college graduates. Some interesting articles pulled from the web include a piece by The Atlantic titled, "Half of College Graduates Are Jobless or Unemployed." Another piece by the Business Insider, "Law School Underemployment Crisis." Yet another by NPR, "Boomerang Baby Phenomenon," referring to the more recent phenomenon of young adults leaving the house to attend college and then returning upon graduation simply because of an inability to secure employment and become financially independent. And lastly, an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, "A Lament for the Class of 2010. There's a quote from that Wall Street Journal article that provides a sobering summation of our current situation. It left a significant impression on me, enough so that I was able to remember this particular article 2 years after its printing. It reads, "Over the next few weeks, hundreds of thousands of millennials will graduate from institutions of higher learning. They will celebrate for several days, perhaps several weeks. Then they will enter a labor force that neither wants nor needs them. They will enter a world where they will compete tooth and nail for jobs as waitresses, pizza delivery men, file clerks, bouncers, trainee busboys, assistant baristas, and interns at bodegas." To continue with my question, considering our chronically high unemployment rates, the number in Stanislaus County being roughly twice the national average, what do you believe local college students should be doing today to realistically prepare for their entrance into a still ailing labor market?
Well, I have a few things to say about that. First of all, younger people are having trouble finding work all around the world right now. Unemployment rates in Spain among youth approaching 40 or 50%. And so I think that it's going to be hard for anybody entering the job market right now. But I think we should also point out that not everybody is unemployed. In fact, there are many people who looked for work and they were able to find work, even recent college graduates. So I don't think it's a doomsday kind of scenario. I just think that it's a challenging scenario. But I think that there are a few ways that college students can hedge their bets in order to maximize the probability that they are able to find employment where they want it.
And part of that hedging, obviously, that's done while they're in school, before graduation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're getting to the point where you're applying for jobs, there's some sort of no-brainer things that you can do, like making sure there are no mistakes on your resume. But really, this process needs to start several years in advance. The first thing that students ought to do is investigate a couple of things. First and foremost, what sorts of things are they interested in? What sorts of things are they good at? But in addition to that, they ought to also investigate what sorts of things are the market, or is the market demanding right now in students. For example, in the energy sector or health services sector, employment prospects look good for the next decade. In other sectors, maybe not so good. And so students ought to, prior to making any sorts of effort to get a job, try to think about what sorts of industries they fit best in. And then the second thing I think students ought to do is to spend a lot of time preparing themselves for that industry, not only through a college degree, but also through internships and other sort of vehicles through which they can gain experience, so that potential employers can see them as a better hire than the next guy who just has a college degree but has no experience whatsoever. If you have experience, not only can you walk in and sort of hit the ground running, but you can also prove that since you have experience and you're still interested in working in this sector, you're not going to be quitting in 2 years. This is something you actually want.
There's a level of seriousness that you're communicating, a sense of dedication to the field, to the industry, or to the sector that the average college student that is just looking for that first job is not going to be able.
And maybe, I don't even know, I mean, I think you're right about the dedication, but also just demonstrating that you are interested enough to continue applying even after you have experienced it. For example, I had a job as a lab technician in a biology lab after I graduated, prior to going to graduate school. I hated it. That was my first job, and I didn't know whether I was going to like it or not. But had I been interning in a lab like that for 3 years in advance and I still applied for that job, the people hiring me would have had a a little bit better information that I'm likely not going to be quitting. And that's a risk for employers where I believe the average 32-year-old has changed jobs 9 times in their life.
If you're a bio major and you don't plan on going into the pre-health field, into dentistry, pharmaceutical, or doctor, I'm assuming that lab work, that's pretty part and parcel, right? After you graduate, you're looking for a lab position.
So, first of all, at the time, when I went to school, somebody told me that I should do what I love, and I was interested in biology, so I just did it. I wasn't going so that I could get a particular career. That was perhaps one of the mistakes I made. I never really thought about what career I would like. Obviously, in graduate school I did, but not as an undergraduate. But that said, I think that there are other opportunities outside of the pharmaceutical field for students who have biology degrees, or outside of the medical field in general. There's research. Companies like Genentech are always hiring. I don't know if they're actually hiring right now. Biotechnology firms certainly stand to grow in the next decade in general. So I don't know if that...
No, that makes sense. There are quite a few biology majors that are involved in STAMP, and there are tutors. And they're not all planning on going into the pre-health field.
Sure.
So I know that research positions at various laboratories.
Right. And then there's also, laboratories we're thinking about microbiology, but perhaps some of them may be interested in more ecological services, such as water quality, looking at water quality in various reservoirs or streams, general ecology type work where you're surveying various animal or plant populations to see how that population is doing in response to whatever sort of environmental or human stimulus that's being imposed on it.
Hedging one's bets before you enter the job market.
Yeah.
And that's done long before the resume is submitted to whatever job posting.
Oh, yeah. By the time you get to the point where you're submitting a resume, you ought to have already considered what it is you want to do, what are going to be the implications of this choice. You shouldn't be applying to jobs that you know you're not going to like, but you're fearful that this is your only option. You should have already managed your intellectual resources in a way to ensure that you're going to be able to get hired right where you want to be hired.
Not long ago, the Prime Minister of Portugal, this was about 3 weeks to a month back, I remember reading in the newspaper, Mr. Pedro Coelho publicly suggested that his country's unemployed youth look beyond Portugal's borders.
Yeah, I remember.
For work opportunities abroad. And this was scandalized by the media. You essentially have a president or prime minister encouraging the youth of that country to flee.
Yeah.
It's sometimes referred to as the brain drain.
Yep.
This concept of the brain drain, where you have the best and brightest leaving an area, a region, a country, and going abroad to look for better economic opportunities in foreign lands.
Yeah.
How does that relate to our current situation? And do you think that that's happening maybe to California alone or to the Central Valley?
Well, the Central Valley has always had unemployment higher than the rest of the United States. Even when our economy was booming, employment here was about double the national average.
So that ratio is normal then?
The ratio is normal. The rate, the 16, 18, 20%, that's high. But the ratio is normal historically, that sort of difference. But I think in relation to my answer to the previous question, students can hedge their bets in this sense. Now, if I was the leader of a nation, just for political reasons alone, I think I might not advise people to leave. I mean, that's
unexpected.
He was maybe speaking off the cuff in that case. But I will say that expanding one's horizons or options set makes it a lot easier to get employed. For example, if I live in Modesto and I say I want to go into the financial services industry and I want to be a manager at an investment bank, well, there might be a few investment banks, but this is not where investment banking is, right? I mean, we want to be in New York, we want to be in Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, and so that's, that indicates a couple of things. One, there are opportunities in California, but there are also opportunities outside of California. Further, it indicates there may not be as many opportunities in the Central Valley. That said, there are a lot of opportunities in, for example, agricultural industries. I know, for example, in California, the Almond Board. Almond Board seems like an obscure organization. Well, we produce 75% of the world's almonds in this region.
Right here in the Central Valley. Yeah.
And the Almond Board has 44 full-time employees. And they manage publicity and they try to increase demand for their product. And so if you're interested in a field, an industry, or a sector, and this particular area specializes in that sector, then there's no reason to consider leaving. On the other hand, for other sectors, it may be very appropriate to leave, and particularly if you're in the financial industry, then moving to a more urban area may be appropriate. But all of that said, even if you are interested in agriculture and you want to be in farming, whether it's in agribusiness or what have you, there are still other areas besides the Central Valley, and increasing the choice set does not decrease the probability that you're going to be employed. If anything, it increases the probability that you're going to be employed. So to answer your question, by all means, I would encourage people to look outside of their current comfort zone. But I wouldn't encourage people to actively pursue work where they don't want to be. I mean, you want to be happy with your life, you want to be happy with where you're living. But I think that there are a lot of people happy in New York, and there are a lot of people happy in the Central Valley. Making a move like that, or even moving to a place like Canada or the European Union, maybe this is a really outside chance, but applying for work in, say, Singapore, India, China, there are people...
These economies are a bit more immune to the global financial crisis. Australia, New Zealand.
And there are firms hiring all around the world. And so I think if somebody is approaching graduation, let's say it's a year and a half away, and they're concerned that they're not going to be able to find work. In fact, I was speaking with a student today who was a little bit concerned about that. By all means, expanding the options that you're considering is really going to help. But that doesn't mean that there are no options here. There are plenty of companies hiring here. There are plenty of public sector jobs here. It's just a little bit tight right now. I think that people shouldn't worry that they're not going to find work if they're willing to make a couple of changes and willing to be flexible. That's a way to hedge their bets against that risk, in addition to all the other things we talked about, including positioning oneself for the career in which they want to thrive.
Taking those steps early on.
Yeah.
And pursuing a field or a particular position 2 or 3 years out, along with you ask for money in return, a paid position of some sort. Internships, the importance of internships.
Internships, and ultimately the internship enables you to build a network. I think that, we hear this term networking and we think, okay, well, let's go to a networking party. Okay, a networking party, that's just maybe I'm speaking off the cuff here, but you're likely to find a lot of other unemployed people there. What you want to be at is a position where you can build long-term relationships with people for whom you can provide value and who can provide value to your career. And starting an internship is a really, really easy way to get your foot in the door with people who are going to help you make some of the biggest decisions of your life and are going to enable you to become successful.
In terms of education, we've talked about students, what essentially they can do outside of a traditional classroom environment.
Yeah.
They're accruing a competitive GPA and involvement on campus. Educational funding is obviously going to affect that directly. And going forward, that's an issue that here in California is on the tip of everyone's tongue as November 6th approaches. There's a rather important proposition that will affect funding at the CSU level. This is Proposition 30, as proposed by Governor Jerry Brown here. Not to get too granular, but it essentially increases the sales tax by 0.25% and raises income tax on earners of $250,000 or more annually. In terms of educational funding, this is a year-to-year problem. When it comes to determining a budget, things get postponed. We're 3 months after the fact, and a solution, temporary, is developed to buy us over to next year. We've seen this already since probably, 2009?
Well, and even in this case, the current budget is assuming that this is going to pass. the money's already going out.
That I did not know.
Yes,
Wow.
that's why they're called these trigger cuts. If this fails to pass, then these trigger cuts are initiated, which are effectively going to whack the budget for the remainder of the year, starting in January, in order to compensate for the money that went out early already. So that sort of corroborates what you're saying in terms of maybe not planning the way we would like to see things planned.
The issue of financial sustainability is so often overlooked, or rather not dealt with, because it's uncomfortable, and those hard decisions, no one politically wants to make them because that's a suicide mission at that point. But and I'm not quite sure how this funding issue will impact K through 12. I haven't studied sufficiently on that. But how might one deal with these sort of long-term issues of underfunding? I can't point to any one state to say they're doing it right, because it sounds like there's stress equally distributed across.
And I think that this disconnect between what economists might want and what politicians end up getting is always going to be frustrating for economists. But I think particularly in the realm of Proposition 30, I think this poses an excellent example of many of the problems that you're alluding to. And just to kind of illustrate this example, the decision of whether to vote yes or no for Proposition 30 is oftentimes going to depend on what your political background is. Are you a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or socialist or what have you? But what makes this particularly challenging is that the information presented to the voter is really poorly presented. I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say people are presented with outright lies, but they're certainly presented with half-truths. For example, there's a website called Yes on Prop 30, and this website has 3 bullet points. These are the important facts that you should know about Prop 30. Prop 30 will stop another $6 billion in cuts to education. And of course, everybody wants to stop $6 billion in cuts. Prop 30 will prevent steep tuition hikes. Yeah, I like that. And Prop 30 will invest in our schools. Yeah, I like that. So when I go to this Yes on Prop 30 website, everything sounds good. Well, what they effectively did is presented the benefits of Prop 30, and I don't think that they've lied in this case. You can go to another website, Stop Prop 30, and they have 4 bullet points. Stop Prop 30 says that Prop 30 will raise sales and income tax on all Californians as much as $50 billion over the next 7 years. I don't think anybody wants that. Prop 30 doesn't guarantee any new funding for schools. That's actually true. As I said a little bit earlier, Prop 30 merely continues the existing funding. It doesn't provide new funding. Of course, if Prop 30 doesn't pass, then the existing funding gets reduced by $6 billion a year. Prop 30 destroys small business and kills jobs. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but certainly increasing taxes isn't going to help business, and increasing taxes isn't going to help jobs. And then the 4th bullet point is that it includes no reform, and that one's a little bit ambiguous. I'm not sure what exactly they were getting at, but I can guess that they were alluding to the fact that this merely extends existing funding rather than creating new programs or cutting old programs. Problem is that if you're a member of one or the other political party, you're going to be directed to one of these 2 websites, neither of which really explains what Prop 30 is.
So they've essentially taken the traditional pros and cons, that chart, draw your T, and you have for and against, and they've torn that paper in half and scotch taped it to the monitor.
Exactly.
And it's become a website.
And what's really scary for me is I think that a lot of people, these websites present information purported to be unbiased. And in a sense, as I said, they're not really lying. They're not making things up and presenting false information, but both proponents and opponents are providing limited information. And so what I was able to do, I went to, and anybody can do this, and I really recommend, especially for something like this, which I think is going to have a big impact on California, is on the California government website, just ca.gov. You can search Proposition 30, and you can actually print out the proposition. And there's this nice little Attorney General report on what the proposition does. And there are a few important things that I think people ought to be aware of.
And it doesn't look too intimidating. It's not a ream of paper.
No, this thing is
that you brought in or anything.
6 pages long. It's very easy for anybody to understand. And furthermore, it provides a nice summary on top. And so everything that you said initially you are right on, that this raises sales tax by 0.25% for everybody, and it raises income taxes for people who earn over $250,000 a year. And in exchange for those increase in taxes, which we generally think of as a bad, this is going to provide $6 billion of funding for schools. And as I said earlier, it's not additional funding, it's merely continuing the existing funding. But if this doesn't pass, there's going to be a $6 billion cut. Most of that cut is going to accrue to K through 12 education and community colleges. Yeah, and this is, like I said, the proposition itself. The cuts, about $5.3 billion to K through 12 education and $250 million to each the University of California and to the California State University. That works out to be, I believe, $2 million to Cal State Stanislaus, a $2 million trigger cut that would occur
to this campus here.
To this campus here in January. And what that would mean for students is that rather than having tuitions reduced by about $500 as per what they were a couple of years ago, they'll actually be increased a little bit in the fall of 2013. So it works out to be, I believe, $1,000 a year for students. And in addition, there are going to be some jobs lost. These are the costs of not passing Proposition 30. There are some interesting costs to passing Proposition 30. I talked earlier that this is going to be an increase in taxes for people who earn over $250,000 a year. And the increase in taxes is on the order of 1, 2, or 3%, depending on who you are. But
your income level.
Right? Yeah. Well, 3% of $1 million is a lot. And so I did a little calculation here and found that if somebody's making $1 million a year, this is going to cost that person $17,500 out of their pocket.
Just this proposition decision.
Just this proposition. If this passes, somebody who makes $1 million is going to pay an extra $17,500 a year. And when I saw that number, I thought, well, for me that's a lot of money, but if I'm making $1 million a year, maybe that's not a lot. But the real question is, how much extra money are they paying relative to what they're already paying? And that person who's making $1 million a year is already paying $90,000 in California state taxes.
That's only the state level.
That's only the state level. They pay an additional $323,000 to the federal government, in addition to about $17,000 for Social Security and Medicare. So this individual is already paying $431,000 in taxes. It's a 43% tax rate. And now that tax rate is going to be upped by an additional 3%. So not only is this person now paying close to half of their income in taxes, but the interesting thing with taxes is it provides an incentive for people to change their behavior.
Whatever you subsidize, you get more of. Whatever you tax, you get
less of.
Okay.
So this individual who currently is taxed at the marginal rate of about 46%, what that means is for each individual, each dollar that they make over and above their current income, they get taxed 45%. Now they're going to get taxed 48% or 49%. Right now it's 45.75%, including Medicare, and it's going to go up to 48.75%. What that means is that if they earn $1, 50 cents is going to the government. And what does that mean for the state of California? And this gets back to that pros and cons sheet we talked about a little bit earlier. This may encourage people to move their businesses out of state. Right. Now, I don't believe that this is going to kill all businesses in California. I don't think that everybody's going to leave the state of California, but there might be a few. And I think that these costs ought to be accounted for while accounting for the costs of not passing Proposition 30. And so the problem is this makes it really hard for the voter to make a decision on all propositions, but I think that Proposition 30 is particularly important, and that voters should look both at the benefits of Proposition 30 in terms of preventing these cuts to various educational programs. Like I said, it's 5.3
to K through 12. That's
to
massive.
K through 12 and community college. So it's really K through 14.
Okay.
So this Proposition 30 avoids that, but it also presents a new burden for high income earners as well as everybody who purchases anything, because this is going to be an increase in sales tax, albeit 0.25%. One other thing that I thought was interesting about this Proposition 30 is it points out that these top 1% earners in California are already paying 40% of California's income tax. And so I think it's important not only to think about the efficiency implications, but also who's winning and who's losing in terms of this tax. That doesn't mean it should or shouldn't pass. It just means that we need to account for all of these things at once and try to ignore perhaps whatever advertisement you saw recently on whatever news station.
Yeah, that continual bombardment, whether it be media or mail.
Yeah.
So many mailers I get.
It's impossible to sort these things out.
Yeah, in regards to the tax, it does. 0.25% doesn't sound like much, but in terms of what you're purchasing, obviously, that's going to dictate how much you're being taxed. I just purchased a new car.
Okay.
And while I was at the dealership this past weekend, I ended up going through a dealership in Fremont. You pay sales tax on a car purchase based on county of residence.
Oh, interesting.
So I paid Stanislaus County sales tax.
Yeah. And that's so people aren't jumping borders just to get the tax break.
Exactly. Well, and in the county, I'm assuming they believe that this person lives and works in the said county, therefore they should benefit from collecting taxes off of the salaries and the income of these individuals. So while I was at the dealership discussing with the gentleman, he said, here in Fremont, we pay some of the highest sales tax because we have BART.
Oh.
And therefore, the taxes that are levied to support and to fund the BART system are significant.
Interesting.
That, I guess, when you are car shopping, I suppose, if you can somehow demonstrate residency in a county that has the lowest
rates.
Well,
and the question, I guess, is, how much is this 0.25% going to affect people's consumption behavior?
Mm-hmm.
The 0.25% on income may or may not encourage people to cut back on work very much, and the sales tax may or may not encourage people to cut back on consumption. All of this, by the way, is not good for the economy, but this is paid for when we pay for the jobs and services provided in the education sector. For things like automobiles, will 0.25% make a difference? Maybe. For things like socks, underwear, probably 0.25% isn't going to make a big difference at all.
Right. The purchase price is so small to begin with. 0.25% really won't impact.
Yeah, and you need socks, right?
Yeah, the importance of necessity. One thing that I came across when I was originally researching this Proposition 30, I think it's the San Luis Obispo Tribune, California in the late 1990s moved to permanently increase their spending levels based off of the revenue that was being collected.
Oh.
Yes, during this dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
So during these bumper years, where you have corporations that are starting out with $80 stock prices that 12 months later were worth cents on the dollar. They were literally 9 cents, pets.com or something. And California decided then to develop a budget based on these questionable businesses and the revenue that was being collected off of them.
Yeah.
And they have not modified the budget since 1990s. It's hard to ask agencies to cut back and to reduce.
Yeah, one of three things happens. Either you increase taxes, you reduce spending, or you go into more debt.
Right, and it seems like choice C is what...
Choice C has been the option, but that can't happen in perpetuity, and so something else has to give. One of the above has to give at some point. And I think that even though on your television program it's one group of people is advertised to be stupid and the other one has the genius solution for this, in reality, I think there are very intelligent people thinking about this. But with anything, there are going to be trade-offs, and what our voters can do, what's really going to be a good service, is not to, I don't want to say ignore everything that you hear, but try to be as informed as possible about this thing, because ultimately we do live in a democratic society and we have control over these things. And so even though any individual maybe doesn't have a lot of power, collectively we can make changes if we're well informed, if we know what's going on, and if we make the decisions that our research has indicated to be best. But if we just go with what we hear on our favorite news program, we're likely going to come up with similarly bad decisions that we've seen in the past.
The sound bites and the
the
one-sided pros and cons sheet. I think going forward, we'd like to have you again to address issues that would be important for students and the community that welcomes and houses and hosts this university.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
I think would benefit.
No, I appreciate you having me, and if anybody's interested in learning more about me, I have a little website I built, DanielDeisenroth.com. I'm also in the process of creating a new consulting firm. I'm going to work in my area of specialization, which is economic impact analysis and valuation of environmental goods and services. This is what I worked on in my PhD dissertation, and I have some experience working with industry leaders, and whatever I can do to become more involved in the community, I'm looking forward to that, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be on your program here, Michael.
Excellent, and thank you for speaking with us today, Professor Deisenroth. We look forward to future exchanges between you and the Stanislaus Tutoring and Mentoring Program, otherwise known as STAMP. STAMP is a locally based 501c3 nonprofit organization run and managed entirely by students for the benefit of fellow students throughout Stanislaus and Merced counties. If you would like to volunteer as a tutor or professional mentor, please visit our website at stamptutors.com. Again, that's stamp, S-T-A-M-P, tutors.com.